Hi, Tara. Welcome to the Curious Neuron podcast.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. We were just saying how you're local, and I love the fact that we're having this conversation. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't know why we're not in person.
We're so used to it now. This is the world we live in now.
Yes, it's always Zoom. But thank you for joining me. I read your book, Can't Help Falling. I read it in 24 hours. It was over a weekend, and my kids woke up the next day and they were like, "Are we having breakfast? It's Sunday morning. Are you making a brunch?" I was like, "No, not today. I need to finish this book." It was one of those books that I just couldn't put down. You helped me connect to your experience, and it's so beautifully written. And, thank you for being so vulnerable and putting your story out there. I know that it's going to help a lot of people, including the audience here at Curious Neuron.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. So meaningful. Thank you so much.
For the people listening that don't know of you or your work and haven't read the book yet, how about you give just a little bit of a background in terms of what you do and what led to you feeling ready, I guess, to write this book about your journey with fertility and adoption?
Okay, so a little bit of a background. I spent 20 years, most of my adult life, working as a television reporter and anchor for CTV television. And I left that career when my little boy turned 6. And I mean, I feel like I'm going backwards and then forwards, but I was struggling with infertility during that time. And I remember being in a world where I was on TV a lot and having to constantly be pretending that I was not incredibly sad. I had my first miscarriage when I was in my mid to late 30s at 5 months pregnant. And I think anyone who's ever been pregnant can understand how devastating that loss is. But I discovered quickly how little we talk about it and how quickly people expect you to get over it. Because what people say to you is, "Oh, don't worry, you'll try again." Nobody realizes that in that moment, I can't even think about trying again. I'm in a really, really dark place. So when I finally came through my dark place and into my light, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, I thought I want to write it all down because I don't want to forget everything I lived to get to this moment. And maybe my story will help other people feel less alone, because I really felt very alone through that whole process. We talk about it a lot more now, but still, we don't talk about it in the way that we should.
It's still not spoken about, I find, enough. And you're right, because I do know some people that were or are struggling with fertility, and they never bring it up. And I don't want to bring it up because I don't know how to. I don't want to be,
No.
I see older family members saying, "You've been married for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. Where's the baby?" And it breaks my heart because I know what they're experiencing, and they don't talk about it, and they shouldn't in that moment, but how can we support those around us that we know might be struggling? I know somebody who also, it hurts for this person to hear when somebody's expecting. How can we be more sensitive to the people around us experiencing this?
My answer to that is really simple. You have to acknowledge somebody else's pain. So most people, I never brought it up either. You just don't talk about it. You feel ashamed, you feel embarrassed, you feel sad. So you don't talk about it. And you know that other people don't understand what you're living through. But I think that if people had just come up to me and said, "I'm sure this must be a difficult time for you. Is there anything I can do for you? Can I help you?" The same way that you would say that to somebody who lost a parent or lost a job or got a diagnosis that was difficult, or we seem to be very willing and eager to help people when that's something tangible. But going through infertility, losing a baby, not being able to get pregnant, going through that course, people just don't know what to say. So they tend just to not say anything. So my advice would be to acknowledge it, because all you have to do is open the door to sort of say, "I know this must be so hard for you. Is there something I can do?" And with regards to the baby showers, I can tell you how many baby showers I did not go to because it felt like a form of torture to me. But people just left me off of the list thinking that they were doing a nice thing for me. Well, we just won't invite her because but it would have been so much nicer if someone had said to me, "We're organizing a baby shower for this person. It might be really hard if you don't want to come. We totally understand." And I would have been able to say, "Thank you. It is too hard for me to go, but I'd love to contribute to the gift." Just giving me an outlet, giving the people who are struggling with this an outlet to say, "Thank you, it is hard." Just acknowledging it.
I get that. And I think that's such an important point because we tend to, especially with emotions and difficult, even somebody who's passed away, we tend to try to push people past that emotion very quickly, you know, like tomorrow will be better, or let's just do something to move past this emotion. And actually, I'm skipping back and forth in the book, but you have this person, Antoine, which I believe we all need in our lives. I wish I had an Antoine. There was this one sentence that spoke about kind of like letting yourself feel. Is this something that helped you personally as you were going through this? And how did you learn to do that with such difficult moments?
Yeah, it really is. And it's something I still practice to this day. And I think it's a lifelong journey. But I think, like you said, we're just always trying to move past our pain. And I remember thinking when I lost that very first baby, which for me was a pivotal point in my life, I can look at a photo and I can instantly know if it was taken before or after I lost that baby. It was such an instrumental moment in my life. And I remember when I lost that baby, I was thinking to myself, I just don't want to go through it. Like I knew I had a road of pain ahead of me and I just wanted to close my eyes and wake up on the other side of it, but I knew that I had to live it. So I was fortunate to have sort of this mentor around me that was saying to me, the only way you're going to get to the other side of it is to sit with it and give it a place. And day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour, it's going to chip away and it's going to get lighter and you'll find a place for it. And that's what happens. You know, time does help, but it's hard to see it at the time.
You do have another quote about time that just talks about like how that distance creates a sort of peace and
Yeah.
and I know that it's hard. I know that if there are people listening going through this right now, I maybe we don't see that, or maybe they don't see that time factor yet. You first, I also want to express my sympathies. I'm so sorry for everything that you have been through. I cried 3 times, and I wrote the exact pages, and it was so powerful to read it. One of them, actually, we'll get to that at the end, but it was your losses and how you described them, but also the adoption rooms and the amount of babies that really struck me. Um, we'll get to the adoption part soon, but I think it was after the first loss, you talked about going to work fairly quickly, and you brought up work before. This is something I've heard parents talk about. I don't think there's a right or a wrong time, but what sort of advice would you have for a parent who might be going through this and maybe struggling to get back to everyday functioning? Does it help to kind of get yourself and push yourself to go out, or do you need more time to sit with it?
I think that it's a really personal decision. I can say that I was sad for a really long time. I was sad for a really long time. And what I say to people now, there is no timeline on grief, you know, because we can feel bad that we're not feeling better, right? Like, oh, it's been like a month or it's been 2 months. I'm not feeling better. So you start judging yourself and you feel bad and you think I should be moving past it. My advice now in retrospect is there's no timeline on grief and you have to take the time that you need to move through it. Because I don't think we ever move past it. I think we move through our pain, we get to the other side of it. So for me at that time, I thought, I work in such a busy environment. The newsroom is such a busy environment. Let me go back because I want to be distracted. I want to be completely distracted. I don't know if that was the healthiest thing, but it was the thing that was for me working at the time. But I remember going back and I remember wanting to be intensely distracted. And at the same time, people just don't know what to say to you. People just, I think I hope it's better now, but it's really difficult for people to know what to say. It's really tough. But again, like my advice now is to say that, you know, I'm so sorry. Is there anything that we can do for you? Because it's heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. Like I just don't think people really understand the depth of how heartbreaking it is to lose this little being that's inside of you that you've already created a life for it. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? You're thinking of names. You're thinking of practically daycares. You know, like
Yeah.
you're so excited about this life, and for it to leave is really heartbreaking. And then when you can't get pregnant again, or you're trying, or it's not working, and go through fertility treatments, and that's not working, you're thinking, why can't I do something as simple as get pregnant and have a baby? Everybody can do it. Why can't I do it? It's just so heartbreaking.
Were there any, I know we're both from Montreal, but were there any local support groups at that time that were there to help you? Because you talk about the importance of connection. And I know that you had a lot of support also from your partner, from what you described. You described such a beautiful relationship. Um, what else is there outside of your home, right? And your partner? Are there places that somebody can reach out to?
That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I remember I was looking for things like that when I was going through it, and there were very little. I'm sure there are support groups now. There's more books out there that talk about it. People are speaking about it really openly, but it was a really lonely journey. I think that you're either going to be the person that's going to benefit from a kind of group, or you're going to benefit from your own network that's going to help you. But it's refreshing to see it talked about more, but I'm glad that we're still talking about it to give people an idea, especially people who might, the goal is to really help women feel less alone and their partners, but also to help people, like you said, that you didn't know, like my mother and my sister, two of the people I'm the closest to, after they read the book, they said, I didn't know. My mother and my sister didn't know the depth of my sadness, which I can tell you every woman feels that kind of heartbreak when they lose a pregnancy.
Is it because at that moment, while you're going through it, it's just too difficult to speak and open up, even to the close ones that you know would be there to comfort you?
I think people just expect you to get over it. I think people expect you to get over it. You lost it. It wasn't a baby, right? You didn't lose a baby. You lost like a pregnancy. Like, just try again, just try again. Like, people just expect you to get over it. And you know that people feel that way. So you don't open up about it because you don't want to hear those things like, oh, just get over it, or come on, you can try again, and it's said with love, it's said, but it doesn't help. So that was my experience. I'm sure that's the experience of other women too. I didn't talk about it because I knew that that's how people would feel.
I've heard somebody who has one child and then had cancer, and now they are struggling to get pregnant with a second child. And people are saying things to this person such as, well, you already have one anyways. It's the things that I hear sometimes from parents, and I know that it's so hard for them to hear that. It's just that, and again, I think it comes from a place of wanting to give the person hope, perhaps. Like, I don't know why like a lot of like these parents and grandparents are just like pushing on this. But I really like that you're showing that even the close ones, you might not even know what's going on to your sister who's going through this, or your a close family member. So it's important to at least show up and let them know that you're there.
Yeah, and again, just open the door for them to talk about how they're feeling. So this woman that you talked about who's struggling to have a second child, she knows she already has a first child, but that doesn't help. She wants another baby. She wants another child, and she's allowed to want that. So nobody should make her feel guilty. Well, you already have one, so be happy with that. Nobody should make somebody else feel guilty about what they want. They shouldn't. I remember when I did a story on CTV about women in infertility. I really pushed hard for it because there was a lot of pushback, and I finally got it done. And I remember, I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I was reading the comments underneath the story, on the website. People are like putting their comments, and there was so much cruelty,
Really?
like stories, like comments like, well, if you can't have a baby, you should just like accept it. Or, why don't you go adopt, as if it's the easiest thing in the world. Or, you should just be happy with what you have. And I remember a couple of days ago, I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw Hilary Swank just had twins on Instagram. And I read through IVF, and I clicked on the comments just because I was curious to see, okay, all these years later, are they still? And it was the same. There was lots of love, say lots of positivity, but there was those same things like, oh, those kids are going to be, so by the time that you have them going to be older, these kids are now going to have to learn about where they came from, and they're not going to like that. Like, just so much negativity. Why did you have, if you couldn't have babies, why didn't you just accept it? And, I mean,
as if what you're going through, it's so difficult already. We don't need that kind of judgment and comments. I want to quickly touch on the relationship as well with your partner. Again, it was such a beautiful picture of how he supported you and how you went through all of this together. I know that sometimes a mom doesn't have this kind of support, or perhaps the father is going through his own struggles as well, and they might look different than the partner is. What sort of advice from your journey can you offer parents that are listening?
Yeah, I think that the best thing, and it's so difficult on, both sides of the couple, but if I was talking to the couple right now, I would say you have to give each other the space you each need to grieve. Because the reason that my husband and I survived so beautifully through our experience is he never pushed me to pass over it. He never said to me, are we done grieving now? Can we move on? He never did that. He let me take as long as I needed to pass through my grief. And he was doing his own work. He was doing his own work. And I think you just need to stay connected. And we didn't talk a lot, which is the funny thing. Like we really didn't talk about it a lot, because I felt like if I was going to open my mouth, it was just going to be a flood of tears that were going to come out. So we just stayed connected through it without pushing each other to be what we weren't. We were allowing each other the time that we needed and the space that we needed to get over it in our own ways, to pass through it in our own ways.
Wow. I think that really is an important part. And we don't think about that also. We don't think about creating that space that the partner needs. I think we sometimes struggle. Again, it has to do with emotions, right? And that's already a difficult thing for us to know how to handle. But just giving them that space, I guess your space will be very different than your partner's space, and understanding that. There has to be some sort of conversation around that. Maybe like if a partner, I'm thinking sometimes dads or men really struggle with knowing, emotionally how to work through this. Is there anything that you did to help him as well, like in his space?
It's kind of interesting that you're saying it, because I think back now, and we held hands a lot.
Mm.
We held hands a lot.
Connection. Yeah.
That's it. But I didn't have the words to process my own pain, so I couldn't help him with his.
Mm.
I was so, I was in such a dark place that I couldn't even know what his struggles were, but we held hands a lot. We were just holding on to each other. And I think sometimes maybe we get too caught up in the need to talk about it,
It's
to
true.
think that things out. Maybe what we did in retrospect without realizing it was not talking about it, but knowing that we were there for each other just by holding on to each other.
I'd like to move on to the adoption part a little bit, because you really opened my eyes in terms of the lengthy process. It must be a word that's like more intense than that. I had no idea. And only after reading your book, I started speaking to some people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you didn't know that?" And I'm like, "No, I had no idea." And even to the point that some people were telling me, even adopting locally is very difficult, or even more difficult. I don't know if it's true, but once you started the process, can you just share a little bit about like some of the struggles that happened like in this process, and why is it so long? What happens?
It's incredibly, incredibly long. And like you, whenever I mention it to someone and I say, "Oh yeah, it takes like minimum like 5 to 6 years," people are like, "What?" And it's expensive. That's why when people say, "Oh, you should just adopt," like it's the easiest thing in the world. It is so difficult. First you put yourself on a waiting list. And I always tell people who are thinking maybe they want to adopt, maybe they're having trouble getting pregnant, and they're thinking, "Oh, well, maybe I'll think about adopting down the road." I always say, put your name on a waiting list now, because no one's calling you for 2 years minimum. Like no one's calling you. So put your name on the waiting list, and then whatever is happening in your life, if you still feel you want to adopt when they do call you, that's great. If you don't, you can just say thank you. And there's 100,000 other people waiting on that list. So once you wait the years out on the waiting list, then you get the call. Then it's paperwork like you cannot imagine. Then you have to go see a therapist. You have to go through multiple therapy sessions. You have to be assessed by a social worker. Your partner has to be assessed. You have to be assessed together. So it's very frustrating, because you want to say like, really? Can you not tell in an hour that, I've had the same bank account since I'm 13 years old. I've been in the same job for 20 years. So you have to go through all of that with patience and dignity and grace. And then the paperwork gets sent off, and then no one's going to call you for another couple of years. And then you'll get like a call, and they'll be like, "Okay, we have a proposition. Here's a baby now." So like for those first 4 or 5 years, there's no baby. It's just an idea of a baby. Then you get the proposition, and they say like, "Do you want to accept this proposition?" You say yes. And then you won't get to see that baby for like another year, because most countries will not allow babies out of their country. They don't put them up for adoption before 6 months, because they're trying to encourage domestic adoption. So by the time you get around to all your paperwork being done on both sides, governments in both countries need to be involved. It's epic. It's epic. And that was when my husband was struggling the most. Really, when we were going through those years, he just didn't think he could wait it out. It was really difficult.
Something that you opened my eyes to with regards to that is that you're expecting a child again, right? So it's that feeling of child is coming. So if something happens, it's that loss again. And that never would have crossed my mind before reading your book. And it's just so hard and heavy. I had no idea about all this. And I'm thinking also about, from a neuroscience perspective and thinking about emotions and emotional development and mental health, keeping kids, that young in these centers, the way that you describe it near the end of the book, and also giving that year, so much happens in that first year when it comes to development. And if that child is alone in those hospitals and those rooms on their own for so long, there's neglect that happens, which changes how the brain develops. And then you're putting them in foster homes, and then you're having them meet their adoptive parents. To me, that shows that something needs to change within the system, because that is a really significant period for a child's life.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it is agony for every adoptive parent to think, I'm missing the first steps, I'm missing the head lifting up, I'm missing everything. But it is so bureaucratic. And I can understand the desire to protect children. We have to make sure 100% that children are being protected. But this is too long of a process. The problem is, how do you fix a system that is so entrenched? Where do you even begin? Where do you even begin? And depending on the country, they're either going to be in an orphanage or in a foster center or with foster parents. And that's why adoptive parents and communities are trying to encourage these governments to connect the adoptive baby with the adoptive parent as quickly as possible. Because first and foremost, as you mentioned, is the brain development. You need to make sure that they feel loved and protected right away, as quickly as you can. And then there's attachment, right? Then there's that whole attachment where you have to make sure that the baby attaches to you. So there's so much going on in the brain that you would be able to speak more about in terms of how that development is happening. All we know as parents is, I have to make sure that my baby attaches to me, and I have to make sure that I'm there as quickly as possible for those moments. It's a tough part.
Throughout your book, you mentioned Peter, I believe, that you had this connection with. That's another beautiful relationship that you highlighted in your book. And I'm wondering, are you still in contact with?
Yes, I am. We just met him yesterday.
You happened to meet him because of the work that you were doing.
Yeah.
This one random person, but that connection that you shared, and that space to be able to say something that might not have come out as easily with a friend or a colleague, right? I wonder if that's sort of connecting people with random people out there, like to have that space to open up the way that you did. I wonder if you kind of feel like that would be a step, towards some help for some parents.
I think the stranger aspect work, just to give people some context, I was doing a story and his son had died in a terrible, terrible accident. And I was the reporter assigned to that story that day, and that's how we met. And then he emailed me 3 years later just to say, oh, thank you. You had said some very nice things when we had met that day. And when he wrote 3 years later, I was in like the saddest part of my life. And this wonderful pen pal relationship grew. And now we're talking about more than a decade later, and we still have not met in person. So it's a relationship that is, no, still not in person. We're thinking about it now. But so we were just these pen pals where I would be able to say things to him that I wasn't able to say to anybody else. And I think maybe it's just the getting it out. So maybe if people don't have a Peter like I did, where it was someone who I could actually email to and say, this is how I'm feeling, maybe it's just about the writing it down. Because I think the saying it is so hard. You just feel so closed. But maybe for people who are struggling and who don't have that person, just putting it down on paper might be a way to help it come out.
Even through psychology, there's a lot of people that talk about just getting it down on, like writing it down. Journaling is very powerful, but I think the writing part. Speaking of that, I'd love to understand a little bit more about when you were writing your book. Was it something that was extremely difficult to live through again, or was it a bit soothing and healing to write through it and know where you are now, like with the whole process?
I think it was, I think there was a bit of everything in there. I think it was difficult. I think it was cathartic. I think it was helpful. For me, it was like a stream of consciousness. I started reading that book when my little boy, when we got back from Korea, almost immediately. I started writing it, and I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. He was in the bath, and I was like writing. He was in a nap, and I was writing. Like I just wrote and wrote it. I didn't even think about, how it was going to alter. I just wanted it all out on paper from beginning to end. And it was like a giant stream of consciousness. And I think it helped to get it out, but it also helped because I wanted to hold on to it. I wanted to remember it. So I wanted, and I had no idea it was going to be a book at that time. I wanted it somewhere safe. That's what I wanted. So that's what I did. And it was a couple of years later before I thought, like, I wonder if this could help people. And I recently came across this quote by Brene Brown. I think it was, and I read it recently and I thought, yeah, that's exactly it. And this quote that she said, like, one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be somebody else's survival guide. And I saw that quote for the first time a couple of weeks ago. I was like, yes, that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Your book has been out for a year now. We were just briefly talking about that before. How has it been now that you have an audience and people that have read it? Are you hearing from people that feel that now they feel seen and less alone just by hearing your story? Because I know sometimes it helps to know that somebody else has gone through this, to heal.
If I ever doubted that when I was,
Hmm.
made the decision to seek out a publisher and see if I was like, is this going to help? I don't doubt that anymore. I received hundreds of either email, they find me like through email, or they DM me on social media from women who are saying, just thank you, because your story is my story. It's like we all lived that same thing: loss, grief, want to be a mother, can't be a mother. Like it's the same thing in its essence. Thank you for writing it. That's how I feel. I'm so glad to know someone else is living the same. They feel validated. And we were just talking before we started the podcast that when I posted on social media about being 1 year, and this one woman wrote to me and said, I read your book a couple of months ago and it helped me through my darkest times. And for me, I'm just like though I can't express how special those messages are. I feel so glad and relieved and happy. And it's so meaningful.
That's what's, it's hard sometimes to open up and to share something that we've been through, or to open up about how we, experience something. But then when we do it, we see the impact that it has on those who are reading it. And I think just as a society and as a community, it just helps us connect, and to the same way that you did with Peter, right? Like you went to see him, and what you said to him had that impact on him in terms of connecting, to the point that 3 years later, he wanted to write to you. That's the beauty of this human connection that we could have when we're there for people and present for them, and there to listen.
Yeah, I think it is really meaningful. And I think that we need that, right? We need to feel validated. We need to feel validated. We need to feel that somebody else understands how we're feeling, even if it's a stranger who wrote a book about something that you're going through. She understands how I'm feeling. That's why I always say that now. Like, I'm like, I am with you. I am with you. Like, so it just helps to know that someone else lived it, and that how you're feeling is not crazy. You're not crazy like, I spent a year sad after a year of my life. I felt so sad. And so, and in that book, like, you can attest, like, I put it all out there. I did not hold anything back. Like, I thought, if I'm going to do it, if I'm going to write this, for other people to read and to feel something, and to feel less alone, then I have to be as honest as I can possibly be. And that's what I did.
And you did. And I think that's what helped me understand your journey and those that are around me a lot more, because of how open you were with your situation, and everything that you've been through. I'm wondering now also, with regards to the, when you were writing, did you have that specific person in mind? I'm sure, like you just said, you wanted to help those feel seen. But if if I read the book and now I want to share it with people around me, who is it for? Is it for the person who's going through it right now, or is that too soon?
I think that's personal too, because I think, how sometimes someone will give you a book and you'll sit, it'll be on your desktop or on your bedside table for like months or years before it's the right moment for you to pick it up. I think that the gesture of the book for anybody who's going through it at the very beginning is meaningful, because again, it brings us back to that whole idea that I'm acknowledging your pain. So here is something. And for whenever you feel that it's the right time, here it is for you. This is something that might help. And I think that person will then individually decide. Like, one of my close friends, she was struggling with infertility and made the decision to just live her life without children. So she didn't go my route, which was to fight for an adoption, right? So she did, and she still hasn't read it. So she has her own copy.
Not ready yet, yeah.
That's it. And she's like, I feel so, and I'm like, you read it when you are ready. And if that's never, that's okay too. Right? That's okay too. So I think like the gesture of giving it to people who are living through it, they'll know if it's going to help, if it's going to help. But I also think it's for people who love those people. Like if this book had been there so that my sister and my mom could have read it, they would have been more aware of what I was living.
Got it.
Right. So, and it's interesting because some people have actually read it and written to me saying, my sister's going through it. My best friend's going through it. And I have a much better idea of how to help now just by acknowledging their pain, just understanding it, right? Just understanding what somebody is going through makes such an enormous difference.
I definitely know that it helps those that are trying to understand, somebody's going through infertility or has experienced loss. And I love the fact that you're saying like you offer it to somebody with love and you're giving them the space. You're saying, I'm thinking of you and I know what you're going through is hard, but here's this book that I know, can help you feel seen and validated, but read it whenever you want. I love that you're saying to offer that space. It just shows so much love and compassion towards that person.
Thank you. Yeah, I really, even my brother, he lives in another country, and he said, I just, my brother just had a baby, and he was telling a friend of his, oh, I just had a baby, and the husband said, I'm happy for you, but we're struggling, and he got my book and he gave it to him, and he said, whenever, if this can help you or your wife, like it's there, and so he asked me the same question, should I give it? Should I not give it? I'm like,
that's what I was wondering.
It's love. And if it will help her now or later, then it's there. At least it's the gesture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this conversation. I don't want to end it, but I do want to know if you had to share like a last piece of advice for somebody who's listening, and it's always both sides, right? So I guess somebody who's experiencing this or going through this and somebody who has never experienced this, what sort of advice do you have to help them through their journey?
If I have a last moment with you, I'm going to direct my words and my love to the women who are going through it, because that is my sweet spot, and that is where my heart is. I want them to know that they are not alone, that they are not alone. And though it's impossible to imagine, that things will get easier, and the choices that you make along the way will impact. You can make the choice to not have children, and that's okay. And is it always going to be hard? Probably. There will always be some nugget that's going to be difficult, but that's the choice that you make, and that's the path that you're on. Maybe you'll go my way and you'll choose to adopt, and if it works out, that's great. But I can tell you that every time I see a pregnant woman, I still hurt. I still hurt. So I just want them to understand that we just have to find a place where that sadness and that grief lives. A place where it will live, but you're going to have a beautiful, happy life. You will find the light. Time heals, time helps, but don't feel like you've got to get rid of it. Mine's with me all the time. I keep it somewhere, it's there. But, so I just want to offer hope that it's there. You can find your way to the light and to just love whatever life is yours.
Thank you, Tarah. The book is called Can't Help Falling, and I could not recommend this book anymore. It's just such a beautiful read. I read it in 24 hours and it's just, I could not put it down. So I really recommend it. I will put the link to the book in the show notes. And Tarah, are there ways that we can reach out to you? You said you're on social media. I will put that in the show notes. Is there a website or anything else that we can have?
TarahSchwartz.ca. You can grab me there. And please do reach out if you want to talk to me, if you want to email me how you're feeling, if you want to ask me a question. Like I'm so open in there for these women and these couples. If they need anything, if I can be of service in any way, I am there.
Thank you, Tarah.